Alright, here's my privateer. I just took on a ride. It's the first ride on my rocky technical section that I like to ride. So it actually rode pretty good. I need to get used to it. Right now I can feel the weight. I'm not sure if it's actual weight of the bike itself that's heavier than my Izzo, or if it's the tires. I have a suspicion that it's the tires. So I think I'm gonna swap my Maxxis Recon tires onto this bike and see how it feels. But the other thing I'm doing right now is I'm actually playing with the suspension. So the front fork feels pretty good. The spring rate and everything, you know, how much is in there, it feels pretty good. But the rear, actually the rear feels pretty good too, but I was doing some measurements. And Privateer says that this is, you know, this is supposed to be a 141 and right travel, and the shock, and they have the specs for this as 57.5. But I guess I just opened this up and I took out the volume spacers. And when I looked in there, I saw the stroke spacer too, which is 2.5 millimeters, because I measured this, and yeah, I took out, deflated it, and I measured it. It only came out to 55 millimeters instead of 57.5. So I saw that stroke spacer in there. So I'm gonna take that out right now. I already took out the volume spacer, and I measured the travel with the stroke reduction, basically at 55 millimeters right here. I measured this right here. You know, I used a tie, and I compressed this and I tied it up, and I measured it, and I have basically approximately 120 millimeters of travel, maybe slightly more. So if I take it off that stroke and make this into 57.5, I should be getting 141. You know, I should be getting more. Let's actually look at the space I have right here. You know, that's the space that goes in, right? That you lose. Let me squeeze this up here again. So that's a lot of space there. I have like an inch or so of space. So I have an inch of space left here, so that's plenty of space. So it should be good. I just need to take this back out again. So I'll do that right now, actually. You'll see that in the next clip. All right, so I'm gonna unscrew the shock. So basically you have to release all the pressure. Once you release all the pressure, you know, wipe this all clean so it's nice and clean. You should be able to grab this right here and spin it. Well, actually right now it's real easy. I'm doing it with one hand, but I actually already loosened it earlier. But sometimes you have to try to grab it as best you can with both hands. And basically you just spin it, and it, you know, and it releases. So I'm gonna, you know, I'm one hand I'm holding the camera, so let me put the camera down and do this with two hands, so you see that in the next clip. All right, so I got it unscrewed, and let me show you the volume spacers that I pulled out from here. Here's the volume spacer. There's two parts to it. There's this little part right here. This is like hardly anything. This thing is only 0.1 cubic inches. I have no idea how much 0.1 cubic inches is. I'm surprised this thing is not in cc's. And on the Fox fork, they're in cc's. This one is 0.4 cubic inches, so both of these together is 0.5 cubic inches. You know, half a cubic inch, whichever. I have no idea volume-wise what it is to cc's, because I'm used to cc's. So let me show you what that is. So I unscrewed this. Right now it's kind of popping back up, because I think that's probably from the negative spring, the pressure from the negative spring. Anyways, they were up here. You actually, this is the bump stop. Pull the bump stop down. There's this little spacer right here. You pull this down. This little metal spacer right here. So the volume spacers were tucked up underneath right here. So you got the, you know, this front one. It's easy to come off. Basically, it was tucked in something like that inside there, all the way in there. And you see all these spaces right here, these negative spaces right here, these cutouts basically. That's for the shock, because this is they call it a trunnion mount. So all these spaces is for the trunnion mount and for the Schrader valve, and basically for clearance. And obviously this cutout is for the clearance for the shock shaft. So got a half a cubic inches right there. So that's that. So let's slide this back up. All right, so the bottom part here, this is where the stroke, shock stroke is. So right now, the way it is, with the shock stroke in here, the shock stroke right now is only 55 millimeters. So 55 millimeters, and Privateer says that this thing is supposed to be 57.5, but it's not, it's 55. That's because of this little spacer in here. So this little orange spacer here, I'm looking at it and it says 2.5 millimeters. So that's the thickness. So basically there's two Allen heads. There's one right here and one 180 degrees on the other side. So I have to unscrew that. Once I unscrew that, I should be able to take off, slide this spacer up and separate these two. And because this orange spacer is actually two pieces, two halves. They should come off, and I should be able to get my 57.2, 57.5 millimeters of shock stroke. So that should give me my 141, because right now, like I said, I measured it and it only came out to 120-ish, probably slightly more than 120 millimeters. So let me do that. I'm gonna do that off screen as well. This is it looks like a 2 or 3 millimeters or something like that. I'm not sure. But anyways, I'll do that off screen. All right, so I got my little cap right there. I unscrewed it, took out the spacers. So this surprised me. I wasn't expecting this at all. So it says 2.5 millimeters right there, right? But there's 3 of them. It says 3 of them, 2.5 millimeters. So theoretically, if I taking all these out like this, I should get a lot more travel. But I'm not sure if I have enough clearance. This is a 150 millimeter fork. If I took all this out, I might get 150, maybe even 160 travel. And that could be the difference between the I'm not sure what the difference between the Privateer 160 versus the 141. Is it 160 or 161? Anyways, the 160 versus the 140. I'm not sure what the difference is. If the frame is the same or the swing arm's the same, I have no idea. And the only difference really is the shock spacing, the stroke of the shock. So that's probably my guess. Frame-wise, they might be very similar or almost the same. Possibly the swing arm is slightly different. I think Privateer, the swing arm is different, or at least the length is different for different sizes. But I'm not sure if, as far as like how stout, how big and beefy it is, if the 141 is the same, the swing arm is the same or not, and if the main frame is the same. So I have no idea. The folks that do know something about this, let me know. Comment on the bottom and let me know. So I think what I might do right now is I might actually just leave these spacers off and just screw this on and back on and check how much travel I have without any of the spacers at all, and see how that goes. All right, so again, I took out the spacers, all 3 of them, 2.5 millimeters each. So that's, let's see, 2.5. So 2 is 5, 6, 7, 7.5 millimeters. So this thing originally was 55 millimeters. Then now I measured it. It was 63 millimeters. So that's 55, 63. That's 8. So somewhere in there, I got an extra millimeter. Actually, I think when I actually measured it, it was more than 55. It was like almost 56. So that's probably a half millimeter right there. So anyways, so I'm gonna measure the axle. I have my strap right here. I'm gonna squeeze this up and hold it with the strap. Then I'm gonna measure the axle from basically without the strap, the height from right here up to the axle. Then I'm gonna lift the wheel up and measure that height again and see what the difference is now. So prior to this, with all the spacers in here, with this at 55 millimeters, this right here was about 120 millimeters, you know, approximately, maybe slightly more. So let's see what it is now. All right, so this is really interesting now. So I got it tied up here and everything, right? So all the spacers are out. So this is as low as this thing can compress. I measured the axle path, and now basically I'm about 140. So the Privateer's number is a little bit off, and the spec sheet is a little bit off. So right now I'm at 140, you know, axle path with it fully compressed. This is how much space I have left in here. I have, that's probably about a 1/4 inch, maybe slightly less than a 1/4 inch of space. So yeah, so anyways, I measured this from, you know, from the tube at the top of the tube to the axle, with this fully compressed and fully extended, and the difference is basically 140 millimeters approximately. So basically, you know, 141, right? Privateer 141. So it seems like something's a little bit off on Privateer's number, you know, on their website, and it could be just a difference between the marketing person versus the engineers. You know, there's a little bit of loss in translation there, I think. So I'm gonna try it this way. I'm gonna run it like this, without any of the spacers. So I get my full 140 millimeter travel, and I think the front is 150. I didn't even measure the front. It's supposed to be 150 in the front, but let me take the pressure out of the front and see if it's actually 150 or it's 160. I think it's 150 though, because I actually measured it. Let's see, right now it's pretty much fully extended for the most part, more or less. You see the 10% sag right there. And I measure this thing right here. If I measure this, I only have, you know, basically 150. You see 150 right there. There's no way I could get 160. Even if I push this thing out some more, it doesn't give me that much more, you know, it doesn't give me that much more. It's only like a few millimeters right here. So I believe this is 150. But I'm gonna double check exactly if it's exactly 150 or not, or whatever. But anyways, so this is interesting right here. So yes, I'm gonna leave it without the spacers. So basically I took out all 3 spacers. So now my shock stroke is 63 millimeters instead of 55 millimeters. And also obviously I took out the volume spacers as well. So let's see how that performs. Actually I still need to screw these screws on for the little plate that holds this, because otherwise that plate is just free balling, and I don't think that would be good for the shock. All right, that's it so far. All right, so here's that little spacer that mounts onto that holds the spacers down, and the screw that goes into it. The problem, since I took out all the spacers, the problem is that the screw only goes down to about right there. So basically the head is still exposed and it bottoms out. So I'm not gonna put the screw in there because of that, because it doesn't go all the way in. This piece could still rattle around. So I think this piece is aluminum. So aluminum rubbing against a hardened steel shaft, there's not gonna be any problems. Potentially that piece of aluminum here, over time it might have some shavings or something, but I'm not too concerned about it right now. So I'm not gonna be too worried about it. I don't think. Again, I tried to put this in, but it bottoms out. You know, like literally it gets to like right there, and the head is still exposed, and you don't want that, because when this thing drops down, this head right here will hit this up here. Well, actually it hits this bump stop. It doesn't hit up here, but still that force pushing down on those 2 spots where the screws are. I have no idea what's underneath there, how solid it is. I don't want that spot down there to stress and potentially could like cave in or something like that. So I'm gonna keep these things off. I mean, maybe I might go to the hardware store and try to find some shorter ones. Actually, you know what? That's what I'll do. I think I'm gonna go to the hardware store and find some screws like this that are just shorter, and then I could close. You know, then I could screw that down, and I don't have to worry about hitting that stop. You know, bottoming out the screw for this. So I think I'm gonna leave it as is right now. I mean, the hardware stores are closed already, so I can't go and get this part that, this shorter screw that I need. So that's gonna have to wait until tomorrow. So to be continued, for me anyways. For you guys, you'll see it within a few seconds. But that's where we are right now. Yeah. All right. So I just ate dinner, took a shower, relaxing, and I realized I forgot about the bump stop. So remember, with all the spacers, the 3 spacers that came in here, I was only able to get 55. I think I was able to get to like 56 or so millimeters. The reason why I wasn't able to get to 57.5 is because of the bump stop. You know, my body weight alone wasn't enough to, pushing down on my body weight wasn't enough to squeeze this bump stop to give me that 57.5 millimeters of shock stroke. So, but the interesting thing is that I took off the 3 spacers, and those each one were 2.5 millimeters. So 2.5, 5, 7.5. So 7.5, and I was able to get 63 millimeters of travel. Even with 63 millimeters, that's well beyond the 57.5. I still only at that 63 millimeters of travel, I was able to get the 140 axle, travel in the axle. So that tells me that 57.5 still does not get me 41 millimeters, what this thing says. So that right there is still bugging me. That number still doesn't add up. So even if let's say the bump stop wasn't there and I got my 57.5 millimeters, that still doesn't come out to 141 millimeters of travel, right? So remember when I measured the 55 millimeters, I only got 120 millimeters of travel, right? I only got 120 millimeters here. So it took 63 to get 140 here. So that's how much more. Let's see, 55 to 63, that's 8 millimeters more. 55 to 63, that's right, 8 millimeters more. So 57.5, that's only 2.5 millimeters more than 55. So basically I still need another 5, let's see, 2.5, 57 to 63 is 5.5 millimeters, is that right? 57.5 to 63. Yeah, that's right. It's 5.5 millimeters more that I still need to get the full 140. So if this bump stops here with the 3 spacers, that means let's say theoretically this thing has 57.5 with the 3 spacers and the bump stop. That means this bump stop right here, when it squeezes down, it can squeeze down from, what was it, 11? This thing was 11 or so millimeters in thickness, 11.5 I think in thickness. That 11.5 could squeeze down to basically to give this thing from 55 to 57.5. So basically it is squeezed down to 2.5 millimeters, right? Actually, even when I push it down with my bare weight, I'm pretty sure I could squeeze this a little bit more. So if I'm pushing down, and as soon as I hit the bump stop, it's probably not 55. It's probably less than 55 because I'm pushing down with my weight. So I would assume that it's probably a little bit less. I need to test this out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the valve core out up here, so that way there's no air resistance. So that way I can see the full range of this with this bump stop when I hit it. Then I think I will have a better idea. So let me try that instead. Let me try that first. Okay, so measured. No, I have the 3 spacers removed. So I measure this height right here. So I compressed it. I also have the valve core removed. So I compressed it until it touched the bump stop without squeezing the bump stop. Without compressing the bump stop. It looks like this space here between the shock right here. Where it pushes the O-ring to the top of the O-ring here. It looks like that distance is 59 millimeters. Let me double check again. It's kind of hard to do this with one hand. Yeah, it's 59 millimeters. And the distance from the top of where the shock is right here to the very end of the shock is, I believe, 67 and a half. Let's see, let me try that. Let me double check that again. Yeah, so it's not 70. It looks like it's between 70 and 65. So let's call that 67 and a half. So 59 to 67 and a half. Let's see, 59 to 67 and a half. 67 and a half plus 1, 7 and a half plus 1 is 8 and a half. So basically the top of the O-ring here to this edge here is 8.5 millimeters. And the bump stop is about 11.5 millimeters. But with my calculations, because the bump stop is 11.5 millimeters, if you add the 3 volume spacer back in here, not the volume spacer, but the stroke spacer back in here, each spacer is 2.5, so that's 2.5 times 3 is 7.5 millimeters. So 59 minus 7.5. Let's see, 59 minus 7 is 51. No, 52 minus half is 51.5. So basically, the shock stroke with the volume, the stroke spacers come without compressing the bump stop, comes out to 51.5. 51.5, and this shock's supposed to be 57.5. So that tells me 51.5. That tells me 6 millimeters. That tells me the bump stop could be squeezed 6 millimeters. So from not squeezed, it's 11.5 to squeeze down to 6. So let's see, 11.5 down to 6. That's 5.5. Yeah, that's 5.5 millimeters that it could move. So here, this thing is at 59, and down here is 57.5. Oh, excuse me, 67.5. So if I could squeeze this, if I could add another 6 millimeters to 59, that becomes 65. So I still have 2.5 millimeters of space left here. But that's given that that bump stop on the shock is still brand new. So as it degrades, it could probably squeeze even more and more. There's a certain point where it can't squeeze anymore, and probably there's a certain point where that bump stop will just completely disintegrate. But by then, this shock is probably blown already. I probably have to get it rebuilt. But just to give you some wiggle room. Let's say you remove the bump stop altogether, so you have that extra, that full 11.5 millimeters of travel. So it was 51.5 when it touches the bump stop. So 51.5 plus 11.5. 51 becomes 52. 52 plus 11 is 62, 63. So 63 millimeters. So I still have space, because this thing is 67.5. So I still have a few millimeters left. So I'm actually okay with leaving the 3 bump stop off. So remember, with the 3 bump stop off, and I was able to squeeze this thing down to, I was able to squeeze it down, now I was able to squeeze the bump stop a few millimeters, probably about 3 or so millimeters. And that's when I was able to get the 40 millimeters, approximately 40 millimeters to travel here. So if the bump stop squeezes more, I will get even more than 40 here. So I think, and I have the problem with with those screw heads, right? Instead of getting another screw head and also possibly going over travel here and having problems, interference problems here, I think I'm going to put 1 stroke spacer in here. So one of these spacers in here. Instead of, instead of having no spacers or having 3 spacers, I think I'm gonna put in 1 spacer, the stroke spacer, because remember each of these stroke spacers are 2.5 millimeters each. So I put in 1. So, put in 1 of these. I should get that back. Well, I should be safe. I should say I should be safe to run this shock and not lose all my travel. And excuse me, get my travel at the same time, not have interference of the shock body up here. The shock body up here hitting the frame. I think that should work. At least I believe it will work. So actually, let me bounce up and down instead of just pushing down on the seat. Let me actually get on the bike and actually bounce on the pedal, with the valve core removed. See how much this O-ring goes down. See how much I can compress that bump stop. So right now, it's at 59 without the bump stop being compressed. As soon as it touches the bump stop, I stopped. So it's at 59. So let's see how much it actually compresses more and how much more this goes down. Let me try that. Okay, so I put 1 spacer, not volume spacer, but stroke spacer back in. I bounced it up and down, and the O-ring's right here. I still have a couple of millimeters before the O-ring drops down. When I had no stroke spacers at all, and I got the full stroke, the O-ring basically, when I bounced up and down on it, the O-ring basically just about, it was like just about falling off. It didn't quite fall off, but just about. And I think that was too much. It didn't get the its full amount. So I think this is good right here. If I could get that much, basically this is where it stopped. I couldn't get any more compression out of it. I think with the air pressure in here, I don't think I could ever, unless I go too low, I don't think I could ever really bottom it out. I mean, the way it is right now, there's no pressure here at all. I mean the valve core on the where you pump it up, where the valve, you pump it up, the valve core is removed, so air's going in and out freely. So there's no pressure in this at all right now. And me bouncing up and down, and obviously it's not the same as a jump. A jump will compress the bump stop even more. If you did a jump or a drop or something like that, it compresses the bump stop more. But just me bouncing up and down like this without any air in here, that should be, I don't see even a jump or a drop will compress it any more than this, with pressure in here. So I think I'm gonna leave it like this. So with that little spacer here, I'm not sure if I could get the full travel wheel. Actually, you know what, I will, because remember when I squeezed this up, I was squeezing against the bump stop, and I wasn't able to squeeze the bump stop very much. When I bounced up and down, I was able to squeeze it 6 millimeters. But with just me, me bouncing up and down, standing on the pedals, both pedals. So that's a lot more force than just me putting weight on the seat and pushing it down. When I put weight on the seat, pushing it down, I went from instead of 6 millimeters squeezing, I think I was able to squeeze it maybe about 3 millimeters or so, something like that. So it should be good like this, I think. Again, without the stroke spacers, the 3 spacers, none of them at all. And when I was able to squeeze as much as I can with the strap here, I was able to get that 140 here. So that also tells me that I still have more travel because the bump stop wasn't fully squeezed yet. So So now with one stroke spacer and a bump stop squeezing, I think I could still get that full 140 plus millimeters of travel on the back, on the axle. So I'm going to leave it like that, and I'm going to put the valve pull back in and pump it back up to 110. I had it at 110 with the three spacer, but also have the the volume spacers. You know, not just the stroke spacers, but the volume spacer as well. I had it at 110. I didn't get full travel, but I got pretty close, I think. The shock here went to I think it went to like almost 55. So it's supposed to be 57.5, right? From the factory, it's supposed to be 57.5. I got it to about 55, and I didn't really do any like hard landings or anything like that. So I had a little bit more space to go. But anyways, more testing, more tuning, and we'll see where it goes. So I think that's it for today. Okay, so I was looking at the numbers. I made some math. So here, Privateer says the bike has 141 millimeters of travel with 57.5 millimeters of shock stroke. So the ratio should be 2.45, right? But if when I did my measurements, remember when I have 55 millimeters of shock stroke, I only got 120. So 120 over 55 is only 2.18 ratio. Okay, so remember this 218 ratio. This is important. So 218. So now I have about 65 millimeters of travel, and I measured out, basically about 140. So 65 millimeters of travel times 2.18, and it was basically 18, repeating, and that comes out to 141. There you go. So that's the real number right there. So basically, if we use that 218 again with 57.5 millimeters of shock stroke times 218, let's just leave it at 218 instead of repeating it. We basically have 125 millimeters of travel. So basically, at the factory set with the shock at 57.2 millimeters, we only have 125 millimeters of travel. So I guess this is a good way of having a 125 millimeter travel bike, right? So basically, you take off a spacer. You take off a spacer to add a shock stroke, and you increase your travel. So you could have 125. So that was what, 57.5 plus 2.5. So add a space, remove a spacer, so that that would make it 2.5. Increase the shock stroke by 2.5 to 60 times 2.18. Now you have 130 millimeters of travel. So you can have 125 millimeter travels, 130 millimeters travel, and so on and so forth, all the way up to 140. So I think if you take off 2 spacers, it'd be 135. Then 3 spacers is 140, right? Or 141. So there you go. There's the math. So you got your bike, your Privateer 141 could be anywhere from 125 millimeters to 140 millimeters, 140, 41. If you round it up, it'd be 41. In 5 millimeter increments. So not bad. Not bad at all, I don't think. So yeah, so that's your math. So I think I'm not sure how exactly, at least according to my measurements. I mean, when I measured the shock stroke of 120 and 140, that's approximate. It's give or take a few millimeters, but it can't be with that 57 and a half shock stroke. It could not and I measured 120. I can I could be off by a few millimeters, but I can't be off by 20 millimeters. That's just too much. That's way too much. Or actually, it wasn't 57 that I measured. I actually measured 55. Right? At 55, I measured 120 millimeters of travel. Yeah, approximately. And I could be off a few millimeters. And according to the math, if I use that 2.18 ratio, it comes out to with 55, it comes out to not 120 but 125, which is pretty close. That's within eyeball. So there's no way, there's no way it could be off by, even at 125, there's no way it could be off by 15 millimeters. That's just way too much. So those are my numbers, and I'm sticking with it. Unless someone else has something to prove otherwise. I mean, you could use the numbers that Privateer gives, but I think the numbers are off, and I think that there's a there might be a disconnect between engineering and marketing. So engineering and marketing were off base of each other, so they weren't on the same page. So if you disagree with me with the numbers that I have, show me some proof. Show me some numbers and do some measurements like I did. I spent all this time taking things apart and measuring things and everything. I know my method of measuring wasn't exact. I was using a measuring tape, but with these numbers here, I was off. Let's say about 5 millimeters. That's acceptable. I think, but there's no way I could be off by 20 millimeters. That's just way too much. By 15, 20 meters, that's way too much. So those are my numbers. I'm sticking with it. Again, anyone wants to dispute my numbers, I'm completely open to it. But I want to see the numbers. I want to see you make the measurements, and do everything that I did, and to prove me wrong, basically. So until then, I think my numbers are pretty more or less correct. All right, thanks for watching.